The entire Bluefield Animal Shelter fell silent as 8-year-old Emma Reynolds approached the cage. Volunteers froze mid-step, clipboards clutched to chests as the small child reached her fingers toward the German Shepherd that had sent 2 handlers to the emergency room. It wasn't just any dog, it was Maximum Force, the military canine whose service record had been classified after Afghanistan. Barbara, the shelter director, lunged forward with a strangled cry, her coffee mug shattering against the concrete floor. The security guard reached for his radio, knuckles white with tension. Martha Reynolds watched her granddaughter's tiny hand extend toward the scarred warrior, remembering how her late husband would flinch at sudden movements, even years after Vietnam. How many nights had she witnessed that same haunted look in his eyes? "Emma, don't!" Martha's voice cracked with terror, her arthritic legs unable to carry her fast enough. What force could possibly connect this silent child and broken animal? And would Martha reach them before those powerful jaws closed? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Martha Reynolds hadn't planned on visiting the animal shelter that Tuesday morning. At 68, with arthritis flaring in her knees and a stack of medical bills on the kitchen table, the last thing she needed was another mouth to feed. But Dr. Wilson had been insistent during Emma's last appointment. "Your granddaughter hasn't spoken more than 20 words since the accident," he'd said, looking over his glasses with practiced concern. "A therapy animal might help where our sessions haven't. Something small, manageable. A cat, perhaps." Martha had nodded, though her mind was on the final mortgage notice hidden in her purse. 3 months behind now. The modest ranch house where she'd raised her daughter Sarah, and now Sarah's little girl, was slipping through her fingers like sand. "The Lord provides," she'd whispered to herself that morning, an old habit from 50 years of faith tested by a husband returned broken from Vietnam, a daughter lost to a rainy highway, and now Emma's stubborn silence. But even faith felt stretched thin these days. Emma hadn't smiled since the funeral. 3 years of nightmares, of finding the child sleepwalking through the house calling for her mother. 3 years of empty eyes and one-word answers. The cheerful chatterbox who once made up songs about butterflies now moved through the world like a ghost. The German Shepherd had been impossible to miss, despite being tucked away in the shelter's back corner. 7 years old, according to his paperwork, with a graying muzzle that made him look older. The military tattoo in his ear caught Martha's attention immediately. Robert had taught her to notice such things. "That's Max," Barbara had explained when she caught Martha looking. "Former military working dog. Handler killed in Afghanistan. Saved 3 other soldiers by dragging them from burning transport. Highly decorated." Her voice dropped. "But dangerous now. Won't let anyone near him. Military tried reassigning him, but..." She shook her head. "We've had him 3 months. Nobody wants a dog with his issues." Martha understood issues. Robert had come home with plenty. Nights when he'd wake up screaming. Days when loud noises would send him diving for cover. The way his eyes would sometimes look through her, seeing jungle instead of kitchen. Max's eyes had that same 1,000-yard stare. Empty, haunted, waiting for something that wouldn't come. Then Emma had seen him, and everything changed. The connection was immediate and inexplicable. The child who barely acknowledged human presence had been drawn to the kennel like a magnet to steel. And now, watching her granddaughter's fingers extend toward those powerful jaws, Martha felt her heart hammering against her ribs with both terror and something else, a flicker of hope she dared not name. Time seemed to stop in that moment, Emma's small fingers hovering just inches from the German Shepherd's scarred muzzle. Martha's breath caught in her throat as she watched, unable to reach her granddaughter in time. "Don't move, anyone," Barbara whispered urgently. "Sudden movements might trigger him." Max's amber eyes, which had seemed so empty moments before, fixed intently on Emma. His ears, one notched from some long-ago injury, twitched forward. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, no one in the shelter dared breathe. Then, so gently it seemed impossible from such a powerful animal, Max extended his neck and pressed his nose against Emma's palm. "Well, I'll be," whispered the security guard, his hand still frozen over his radio. Emma didn't smile. She hadn't smiled in 3 years, but something in her posture changed. The rigid defensiveness that had characterized her small body since Sarah's death softened ever so slightly. "He's sad," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. "He misses his person." Martha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. 8 words, more than Emma had strung together voluntarily in months. Barbara approached cautiously, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "I've never seen him respond to anyone like that. We've had professional handlers try to work with him, even sedated him for vet checks." "Can we take him home?" Emma asked, still staring at Max. Martha's heart sank. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think—" "Please, Grandma." Emma turned to face her, and Martha saw something in those eyes she hadn't seen since before the accident, a flicker of actual presence, of engagement with the world. "He needs us." "Emma, honey," Martha said gently, "Max is a very special kind of dog. He's big and strong, and he's been through terrible things. Our house is small, and—" She couldn't bring herself to mention the foreclosure notice, the dwindling medication fund, the precarious balance of their lives. "He protected people," Emma said stubbornly. "Now he needs someone to protect him." Barbara gestured Martha aside, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Reynolds, I should be clear about Max's situation. He's scheduled for euthanasia in 2 weeks." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Euthanasia? But why?" "He seems dangerous," Barbara finished firmly. "He's bitten 2 handlers. The military classified him as unsuitable for rehabilitation or adoption. We've kept him longer than regulation already, but our board voted last week. He's considered a liability." Martha looked back at Emma, who was now quietly running her fingers along the chain-link door of Max's kennel. The German shepherd watched her with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. "I've worked with shelter animals for 15 years, Barbara continued. "I've never seen a connection like that, especially not with a dog as traumatized as Max. But I have to warn you, taking him would be a tremendous responsibility. He needs specialized care, training, possibly medication. There would be liability waivers, special insurance." Martha felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling on her shoulders. She couldn't afford this dog, couldn't afford the food, the vet bills, the potential property damage. She was barely keeping herself and Emma afloat as it was, but she also couldn't afford to lose this moment, the first crack in Emma's shell in 3 long, silent years. "Could we perhaps visit him again?" Martha suggested, searching for middle ground. "Maybe spend some time with him here before making any decisions?" Barbara hesitated. "Well, normally we don't allow that with cases like Max's, but given how he's responding to Emma—" She glanced over at the child and dog, still regarding each other with mutual fascination. "Maybe we could arrange a controlled interaction in our meet-and-greet room." The meet-and-greet room turned out to be a small, fenced outdoor area with peeling paint and a single bench. Barbara and the security guard, whose name tag identified him as Jim, carefully transferred Max from his kennel using a system of interconnected gates that prevented any direct handling. "We'll be right outside," Barbara assured Martha, her hand lingering on the gate latch. "If anything seems off, anything at all, just call out and we'll intervene immediately." Martha nodded, though her mouth felt desert dry. Emma had already settled cross-legged on the ground, seemingly unconcerned about the massive military dog now sharing the small enclosure with them. Max stood stiffly in the corner farthest from the gate, his posture alert but not aggressive. His eyes never left Emma. "It's okay," Emma said softly. "You can come over if you want." Martha held her breath, but Max stayed rooted in place, his body language screaming caution and uncertainty. "He doesn't trust easily," said a new voice. Martha turned to see an older man in a shelter volunteer shirt approaching Barbara and Jim outside the fence. Military dogs are trained to be suspicious, especially ones who've seen combat. "This is Frank Williams," Barbara explained. "Former K-9 officer. He's been consulting on Max's case." Frank nodded respectfully to Martha. "Ma'am, that's quite a remarkable granddaughter you have. Most adults wouldn't have the patience your Emma's showing right now." Inside the enclosure, Emma hadn't moved. She sat quietly, hands open in her lap, waiting. The seconds stretched into minutes. "Maybe this isn't going to—" Martha began, but Frank held up a weathered hand. "Give it time," he advised. "Watch." Imperceptibly at first, then with slightly more confidence, Max lowered his head. His tail, which had been held stiffly, relaxed slightly. "He's deciding," Frank explained softly. "Military working dogs, especially ones like Max who've served in combat zones, they've seen the worst humanity has to offer. Trust doesn't come easy to them afterward." Another minute passed. Then, with deliberate slowness, Max took one step toward Emma, then another. "Don't move, little one," Frank murmured, though Emma showed no inclination to do so. "Let him come to you on his terms." Step by careful step, Max approached Emma. When he was about 2 feet away, he stopped again, nostrils flaring as he scented the air around her. Something changed in his demeanor then. A tension Martha hadn't even realized was there suddenly dissolved. Max's ears, which had been held alertly forward, softened. He took the final steps to Emma, and with exquisite gentleness lowered his massive head into her lap. Emma's small hand came to rest on the top of his head. "See?" she said, looking up at Martha with the ghost of her old determination. "He just needed someone to wait for him." Martha felt tears well in her eyes. She couldn't have explained the emotion if she tried. It was grief and hope and fear all tangled together like the half-finished embroidery she'd abandoned after Sarah's death. "I have his service record, if you'd like to see it," Frank offered, his voice gentler now. "Impressive animal. Saved his entire unit during an ambush, then pulled 3 men from a burning vehicle after an IED strike. Same strike that killed his handler." "How did he end up here?" Martha asked, unable to reconcile the broken animal before her with the hero Frank described. "Military tried to reassign him. Standard procedure." "But some dogs—" Frank shook his head. "They bond too deeply, can't adjust to a new handler after losing one under traumatic circumstances. They call them one-person dogs. Max refused to work, became aggressive with new handlers. They classified him as unfit for service or adoption. So they just threw him away?" Martha couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. She'd seen the same thing happen to human veterans, her Robert included. Frank's expression darkened. "System's broken in a lot of ways, ma'am, for 2-legged and 4-legged veterans alike." Inside the enclosure, Emma had begun to speak softly to Max, her words too quiet for Martha to hear. Whatever she was saying, the German shepherd was listening with focused attention, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've never seen him calm like this," Barbara said, wonder in her voice. "It's like they know each other." Martha felt something shift in her heart then, a certainty she couldn't explain and couldn't afford. "How much?" she asked abruptly. Barbara blinked. "Excuse me?" "The adoption fee, for Max. How much would it be?" Barbara and Frank exchanged glances. "Mrs. Reynolds," Barbara began carefully, "there's more to consider than just the adoption fee. Max would need specialized training, possibly medication for his PTSD, a securely fenced yard, "How much?" Martha repeated, straightening her spine the way she had when the doctors had told her the cancer had spread, the way she had when the police officers had come to her door about Sarah. Frank spoke up. For a dog with his history, the liability insurance alone would be substantial, plus the special training, equipment. $300 for the adoption fee, Barbara said quietly. But Mrs. Reynolds, please understand, we couldn't in good conscience allow this adoption without ensuring certain requirements are met. The potential risks— I understand risk, Martha said, watching Emma whisper something into Max's ear. I also understand what it means to be written off as too damaged to save. The memory of Robert came to her then, not the broken man who'd wake screaming from nightmares, but the moment in the VA hospital when he'd finally recognized her after weeks of vacant stares. The way his hand had tightened on hers, his eyes clearing just for a moment as he'd whispered, "Martha, you waited." She'd waited then. Perhaps she was meant to wait again. "We could consider a foster-to-adopt arrangement," Barbara suggested, her professional demeanor softening. 2 weeks. See if it's a good fit before making it permanent. We'd need to do a home inspection, and there would be paperwork, quite a lot of it, given Max's history. Martha nodded, already mentally calculating which bills could wait, which medications she could stretch. When could we start? The paperwork took nearly 2 hours. Martha's hand cramped as she signed liability waivers, special adoption forms, and an agreement outlining the 2-week foster period. Each signature felt like another step down a path she couldn't afford to walk. But Emma's quiet insistence was impossible to deny. "The home inspection will be tomorrow," Barbara explained, handing Martha a thick folder of information about canine, PTSD, training resources, and emergency contacts. "Frank has offered to conduct it himself, given Max's special circumstances." Frank nodded, his weathered face serious. "I'll bring some equipment you'll need. Proper leash, harness, maybe a muzzle for public outings at first. Don't worry about the cost," he added, seeing Martha's expression. "I keep extras from my K9 training days." Outside in the parking lot, reality hit Martha like a physical blow. Her ancient Buick, with its torn upholstery and temperamental air conditioning, seemed woefully inadequate for transporting a former military working dog. She hadn't thought this through. "We'll help you get him home today," Barbara said, reading her concern. "Jim can follow in the shelter van. Then tomorrow Frank will bring the equipment and do the inspection." The drive home was tense. Martha kept glancing in the rearview mirror, where Emma sat beside Jim in the shelter van behind them. Max had been coaxed into a large travel crate, sedated just enough to take the edge off his anxiety during transport. Martha's mind raced with all the ways this could go wrong. What if Max reacted badly to the new environment? What if the home inspection revealed problems she couldn't afford to fix? What if her nosy neighbor Elaine called animal control? The HOA had rules about dangerous breeds, though Martha had largely ignored the association since Robert's death. Then there was the money. The adoption fee had cleaned out her checking account. She'd have to dip into her medication fund for dog food, and if the bank moved forward with foreclosure— She pushed the thought away. One problem at a time, as Robert used to say. Their modest ranch house looked shabbier than usual as Martha pulled into the driveway. The gutter was still hanging loose where last winter's ice had pulled it away from the roofline. The front steps needed repainting. The yard, at least, was neat. Martha still took pride in her flower beds, the roses she'd planted when they'd first bought the house 40 years ago. "This is it," she murmured, more to herself than to Barbara, who had followed in her own car. "Not much, but it's home." Jim backed the van carefully into the driveway. "Where would you like us to set up Max?" he asked, his earlier wariness of the dog now tempered with professional courtesy. Martha hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and the sun porch Robert had added before his final deployment. The sun porch, I think. It's enclosed but has lots of windows. Might feel less confining than being inside proper. Emma had already hurried ahead to open the side door leading to the sun porch. Martha was struck by the purposefulness in her movements, so different from the listless shuffling that had characterized the past 3 years. "We've set up a safe space for him," Barbara explained as Jim carefully maneuvered the large crate through the door. "This crate is Max's territory, his safe haven. It's important that you never reach in when he's inside. That's his space to decompress." Martha nodded, trying to absorb all the instructions Barbara was giving about feeding schedules, bathroom breaks, signs of stress to watch for. It was overwhelming, like bringing home a newborn but infinitely more dangerous. "I'll check in tomorrow when Frank comes for the inspection," Barbara promised, handing Martha a business card with her cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Call any time, day or night, if you have concerns, and remember, if at any point you feel unsafe, you can return him immediately." After the shelter staff left, Martha stood uncertainly in the doorway of the sun porch, watching Emma sit cross-legged on the floor near Max's crate. The German shepherd was still inside, the door open but his body language making it clear he had no intention of venturing out. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Martha asked. "It's past lunchtime." Emma shook her head without looking away from Max. "I'll wait with him. He's scared." Martha sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Emma's shoulders. "All right, but I'll bring you a sandwich in a bit. You need to eat, even if Max isn't ready to come out yet." In the kitchen, Martha's hands trembled as she made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The magnitude of what she'd done was sinking in. She'd brought a traumatized military dog with a bite history into her home, where her traumatized granddaughter was now sitting inches away from him. What had she been thinking? The phone rang, startling her enough that she dropped the knife with a clatter. "Martha? It's Elaine from next door." The voice on the other end held the particular tone of neighborly nosiness that Martha had come to dread. "I couldn't help but notice the animal shelter van. Don't tell me you've taken in a stray. The HOA bylaws are very specific about—" "It's a therapy dog for Emma," Martha interrupted, the half-truth coming easily. "Doctor's recommendation." "Oh." Elaine paused, momentarily deflated. "Well, I hope it's not one of those dangerous breeds. The Hendersons down the street had a pit bull mix that dug up half the Wilsons' garden last summer, and the board had to—" "It's a German shepherd," Martha said, knowing she couldn't hide that fact for long in their close-knit neighborhood. "Very well trained, military background." "Military? You mean like those police dogs?" "Martha, those aren't pets, they're—" "I need to go, Elaine. Emma needs her lunch." Martha hung up without waiting for a response, a small act of rebellion that gave her a fleeting sense of satisfaction. When she brought the sandwiches to the sun porch, she was startled to find Max had emerged from his crate. He stood stiffly in the corner farthest from the door, watching Emma with intense concentration. "He came out," Emma said, a hint of pride in her voice. "I didn't move or talk too loud, like Mr. Frank said." "That's wonderful," Martha said, carefully setting the plate down on the small table. "You're being very patient with him." As if he understood they were discussing him, Max's ears twitched forward. He took a single step toward Emma, then froze, as if testing his own courage. "It's okay," Emma said softly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." Martha watched, amazed, as Max took another cautious step. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, but determined. When he reached Emma, he lowered his head slightly, allowing her to touch the top of his head with one small hand. It was such a small thing. A damaged dog allowing a damaged child to offer comfort. Yet Martha felt her eyes well with tears. How long had it been since Emma had connected with any living thing this way? The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, new rhythm. Emma remained in the sun porch with Max, occasionally coaxing him to take a few steps around the room, but mostly just sitting quietly with him. Martha busied herself with practical matters, setting up water bowls, arranging blankets in the crate, checking the backyard fence for gaps. As evening approached, Martha faced a new dilemma. Emma's bedroom was upstairs, but it was clear the child had no intention of leaving Max. "Sweetheart, it's getting late," Martha said gently. "Max needs to rest, and so do you." "I'll sleep here," Emma replied with the simple certainty of childhood. "He'll be scared alone." Martha wanted to argue, to insist on normal bedtime routines and proper beds, but the determined look in Emma's eyes stopped her. Instead, she brought down pillows and blankets, setting up a makeshift bed on the old wicker sofa that had been Robert's favorite reading spot. "Just for tonight," she conceded. "Tomorrow we'll figure out a better arrangement." After Emma had changed into pajamas and brushed her teeth, Martha helped her settle onto the sofa. Max watched the entire process from his corner, his posture alert but no longer rigid with fear. "Would you like me to read you a story?" Martha asked, maintaining the bedtime ritual they'd established after Sarah's death. To her surprise, Emma nodded. "Can we read the one about the lost dog who finds his way home? Max might like that one." Martha's heart squeezed. It was the first time Emma had expressed a preference for anything in months. "Of course we can." As Martha read the familiar story, she noticed Max slowly edge closer to the sofa, his interest seemingly piqued by the sound of her voice. By the time she reached the happy ending, the German shepherd had settled on the floor beside Emma, close enough that she could rest her hand on his back. "See, Grandma?" Emma whispered as Martha tucked the blanket around her. "He just needed to find his people." Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Martha sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and the stack of bills she'd been avoiding. The numbers hadn't changed, but somehow the weight of them felt heavier now. She had another mouth to feed, another life to be responsible for. She was so absorbed in her calculations that she didn't notice Max until he made a soft sound at the sun porch doorway. Martha startled, nearly spilling her tea. The German shepherd stood in the threshold, his posture alert but not threatening, his amber eyes fixed on Martha with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Hello there," she said softly, careful to make no sudden movements. "Checking on me, are you?" Max didn't enter the kitchen, but he didn't retreat either. For a long moment they simply regarded each other, two guardians of the sleeping child, sizing each other up. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Martha said, finding comfort in speaking aloud. "Both of us trying to protect her, neither of us quite knowing how." Max's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but otherwise he remained perfectly still. "I don't know if I've done the right thing bringing you here," Martha continued, the confession easier to make to those silent, understanding eyes. "I can barely keep this roof over our heads as it is, but she connected with you, and that," her voice caught, "that's worth something. Worth everything, maybe." As if satisfied with what he'd seen, Max turned and padded silently back to the sun porch. Martha heard the soft sound of him settling on the floor near Emma's makeshift bed. She looked down at the final notice from the bank, the bold red letters blurring through her tears. They had 30 days before foreclosure proceedings would begin. 30 days to find a miracle. "Lord, provide," she whispered, her mother's old prayer falling from her lips. But for the first time in her life, Martha wasn't sure if anyone was listening. The sharp rap on the front door jolted Martha awake. She'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table, her cheek pressed against the stack of bills. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the clock on the microwave showed 8:17 a.m. "Coming?" she called, wincing as her arthritic joints protested the sudden movement. She smoothed her rumpled clothes, tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, and hurried to the door. Frank Williams stood on the porch, a large duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a cardboard box in his arms. "Morning, Mrs. Reynolds. Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," Martha lied, stepping back to let him in. "And please call me Martha." Frank nodded, his keen eyes taking in the modest living room with its dated furniture and faded photographs. "Barbara mentioned you're on a fixed income. I brought some supplies to get you started with Max." He set the box down. "Basic essentials, proper leash, training collar, some high-value treats for positive reinforcement." Martha flushed with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly—" "Consider it a veteran helping a veteran's family," Frank said, his tone gentle but firm. "My unit benefited from dogs like Max. Least I can do is make sure he gets a fair chance in civilian life." Before Martha could respond, Emma appeared in the sun porch doorway. To Martha's surprise, Max stood beside her, no longer cowering in the corner or hiding in his crate. Though still alert and watchful, the German Shepherd's posture was relaxed in a way it hadn't been at the shelter. "Well now," Frank said, his eyebrows rising. "That's quite a change from yesterday." Emma's small hand rested lightly on Max's shoulder. "He slept by my bed all night. He only growled once when the neighbor's cat jumped on the windowsill." Frank nodded approvingly. "Good restraint. He's identifying threats but not overreacting." He knelt, bringing himself to Max's eye level. "Morning, soldier." To Martha's amazement, Max's posture subtly shifted. Head higher, ears forward, body straightening as if responding to an unspoken command. "Military bearing," Frank explained, noting Martha's expression. "These dogs are trained to recognize authority. He knows I'm familiar with his world." He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew what looked like a small rubber toy. "May I approach him?" Emma looked down at Max, then nodded. "I think it's okay." Frank moved forward with deliberate slowness, his body language non-threatening. "Max, here." He held out the toy. The German Shepherd looked at Emma as if seeking permission. "It's okay," she said softly. "Mr. Frank is our friend." Max took 2 careful steps forward and delicately took the toy from Frank's hand. Instead of retreating, he remained where he was, the toy held gently in his mouth. "Good boy," Frank said, his voice warm with approval. "Very good boy." The home inspection proceeded smoothly after that. Frank checked the fences, suggested a few minor adjustments to make the yard more secure, and showed Martha and Emma how to properly handle Max's leash and harness. "He's responding remarkably well," Frank observed as they practiced walking Max around the backyard. "Especially with Emma. I've worked with military dogs for over 20 years, and I've never seen one bond this quickly with a child." Martha watched as Emma led Max through a series of turns, the German Shepherd attentive to her smallest movements. "They seem to understand each other," Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Trauma recognizes trauma sometimes, but there's something else here." He trailed off, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Reynolds, Martha, would you mind if I asked you something personal?" Martha tensed, but nodded. "Your granddaughter's mother, your daughter. How did she pass, if you don't mind me asking?" The familiar ache bloomed in Martha's chest. "Car accident, 3 years ago, rainy night, truck crossed the center line." She swallowed hard. "Emma was supposed to be with her but had a fever that day. Sarah was going to pick up medicine." Frank's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. Did your daughter by chance use any particular perfume or scent? Lavender, perhaps?" Martha blinked in surprise. "Yes, actually, Sarah had this natural lavender scent, something genetic. Her father had it too. Emma has it as well, though fainter." "How did you know?" Frank's eyes widened slightly. "Just a hunch. Military working dogs are trained to identify people primarily by scent, not sight or sound." He looked over at Emma, who was showing Max a butterfly that had landed on a nearby bush. "Some handlers use distinctive personal scents to strengthen their bond with their dogs." It makes me wonder if Max's handler might have had a similar scent profile. "You think that's why he responded to her?" Frank shrugged. "Maybe partly. Could explain the immediate trust. Dogs' scent memory is incredibly powerful, can last years. He glanced at Martha. May I ask one more question? Your late husband. He served in Vietnam, correct? Martha nodded, wondering where this was leading. Did he struggle when he came home? With readjustment, I mean. Martha's throat tightened. Yes. What they called shell shock back then. PTSD now, I suppose. Night terrors, flashbacks. Couldn't handle crowds or loud noises. The memories washed over her. Robert diving under the kitchen table during a thunderstorm, waking up screaming, the vacant stares that would last for days. Frank nodded slowly. And you stayed with him through all of it. It wasn't a question, but Martha answered anyway. Of course I did. For better or worse, in sickness and health. I meant those vows. That's why you took Max, isn't it? Despite everything, the cost, the risk. Martha looked over at Emma and Max, an unlikely pair united by invisible wounds. I couldn't save Robert, couldn't save Sarah, but maybe. She didn't finish the thought. Frank squeezed her shoulder gently. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. That dog needed exactly what you and Emma can give him, patience and understanding. The rest of the day passed in a blur of new routines. Frank helped them establish feeding schedules, demonstrated basic commands, and showed them how to recognize signs of stress in Max's body language. The key is consistency, he explained, as they sat at the kitchen table, Max lying alertly at Emma's feet. Dogs like Max need structure, makes them feel secure. Like my Robert, Martha murmured. Frank nodded. Exactly. Military training becomes part of them. Routine helps them make sense of a world that suddenly doesn't follow the rules they learned. After Frank left, promising to check in regularly, Martha felt both encouraged and overwhelmed. Max was already showing remarkable improvement, but the financial reality of their situation remained dire. That evening, while Emma was showing Max his new bed, though Martha suspected he would continue to sleep beside the child, the phone rang. Martha, it's Elaine again. Her neighbor's voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone bursting with news. I just heard the most concerning thing from Patricia Wilson. She says you've taken in some kind of attack dog from the shelter. Martha sighed. News traveled fast in their small community. He's a retired military working dog, Elaine. He's adjusting very well. But is it safe? Patricia's son works at the sheriff's office, and he says those dogs can snap without warning. And with Emma in the house, Emma is the reason we adopted him, Martha said firmly. He's a therapy dog. Elaine sniffed audibly. Well, the HOA board is concerned. You know the bylaws have restrictions about dangerous animals. There might need to be a special meeting. Martha felt a flash of irritation. The Homeowners Association had been a thorn in her side since Robert's death, nitpicking about everything from her mailbox paint to how long she left her garbage cans at the curb. Max is not dangerous, she said with more confidence than she truly felt. And I'd be happy to discuss it with the board, but right now I need to tend to my granddaughter. She hung up before Elaine could respond, a small act of defiance that gave her a moment's satisfaction before worry crept back in. The last thing they needed was a battle with the HOA. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, in her own room this time, though Max had followed her upstairs as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Martha sat at the kitchen table with her Bible and her bills. The foreclosure notice seemed to mock her from the top of the pile. 30 days. The property tax bill beneath it was equally daunting. Then there were the utilities, the car insurance, her medications. Martha had been pinching pennies since Robert's VA benefits had been reduced 5 years ago. She'd taken on part-time work at the church office until her arthritis made typing too painful. She'd sold Robert's tools, her good china, even her engagement ring after the cancer diagnosis 2 years ago. Now, with Max's food and eventual veterinary care to consider, the math simply didn't work. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, running her fingers over the worn leather of her Bible. She flipped it open, seeking comfort in familiar verses, and found herself looking at Psalm 91, Robert's favorite, the warrior's psalm, he'd called it. A soft whine made her look up. Max stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes fixed on her with that uncanny intensity. "Can't sleep either, huh?" Martha said softly. The German shepherd padded across the kitchen and, to her surprise, settled at her feet with a deep sigh. "You understand worry too, I expect," Martha murmured, finding comfort in speaking aloud. "Wondering where your next meal is coming from, whether you'll have a roof over your head." Max rested his chin on his paws, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm too old to start over again," Martha confessed to those understanding eyes, "but too stubborn to give up." She glanced at the stairs, thinking of Emma sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. "She needs this home. Needs you, apparently." Max's tail thumped once against the linoleum floor. An idea began to form in Martha's mind. She'd avoided it for years, seeing it as a last resort, but perhaps that time had come. The next morning, after getting Emma off to school, a minor miracle in itself, the child had actually eaten breakfast without prompting and spoken a complete sentence to her teacher when Martha dropped her off. She drove to First National Bank with Max in the back seat. "Military service dog," she explained to the security guard who raised an eyebrow at the German shepherd. "Fully trained." Max's behavior was impeccable as Martha sat down with Mr. Collins, the loan officer who had handled her mortgage for the past decade. "Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted her, his expression professionally sympathetic, "I was planning to call you this week about the foreclosure notice." "That's why I'm here," Martha said, straightening her spine. "I'd like to discuss a reverse mortgage." Mr. Collins blinked in surprise. "A reverse mortgage?" "Well, yes, given your age and equity position, you would qualify. But there are significant considerations." "I'm aware," Martha interrupted. "I've done my research. The house is paid off except for the last year of payments that I've fallen behind on. Robert and I bought it for $42,000 back in '78. It's worth considerably more now." "Yes. Our last appraisal put it at around $220,000, which is quite good for your neighborhood." Mr. Collins pulled up some figures on his computer. "With a reverse mortgage, you could clear the outstanding balance, receive a lump sum or monthly payments, and remain in the home for the rest of your life." "That's what I want," Martha said firmly. "Enough to clear the current debt and provide a monthly supplement to my Social Security." Mr. Collins nodded, typing some figures into his computer. "We could certainly arrange that." "Of course, the home would eventually revert to the bank." "I understand." Martha had made her peace with that reality during the sleepless night. Emma would be grown by then, and Martha harbored no illusions about her own longevity. The cancer was in remission, but her last checkup had shown concerning shadows on the scan. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even her doctor. Some burdens were hers alone to bear. As Mr. Collins printed out paperwork, Max shifted slightly, pressing his warm body against Martha's leg as if sensing her distress. "Your dog seems very attentive," Mr. Collins observed. "My brother-in-law has a service dog for his diabetes. Amazing what they can sense." Martha nodded, absently stroking Max's ear. "Yes, they're remarkable animals." 3 days later, Martha received the final paperwork for the reverse mortgage. The relief of knowing they would keep their home was tempered by a sense of finality. This was truly her last financial resource. But as she watched Emma and Max in the backyard, the child actually laughing as the German shepherd cautiously nudged a ball back to her, Martha knew she'd made the right decision. Their new routine settled into place with surprising ease. Max accompanied Emma to and from school, waiting patiently at the fence during the day. His presence seemed to buffer the child against the social anxieties that had plagued her since Sarah's death. Frank visited weekly, helping with training exercises and bringing occasional supplies. "He's a different dog," he observed during his third visit. "I've never seen such rapid improvement." Martha had to agree. The fearful, aggressive animal from the shelter had transformed into a vigilant but gentle guardian. Max still had moments of anxiety. He would flatten himself to the ground during thunderstorms, and certain mechanical sounds would cause him to tremble. But his progress was remarkable. The HOA had indeed called a special meeting about Max, but the tide of opinion turned unexpectedly in Martha's favor when Max alerted to Mrs. Henderson's undiagnosed heart condition during the meeting, barking insistently until someone called an ambulance. The cardiologist later confirmed that the early warning had likely saved her life. "A hero twice over," the local paper called him in a small article that ran the following week. The photo showed Max sitting proudly beside Emma, his posture straight, his dark eyes alert but peaceful. What the article didn't mention was how Max had begun to change their home in subtle ways. Emma was speaking more, her nightmares less frequent. Martha found herself planting flowers again, something she hadn't done since before Sarah's death. Even the house itself seemed more alive, as if Max's presence had awakened it from a long slumber. But one question continued to nag at Martha, especially late at night when her mind would drift to the mysterious connection between Emma and Max. Frank's theory about the lavender scent made sense, but it didn't fully explain the depth of their bond. One evening, about 3 weeks after Max's arrival, Martha found herself going through old photo albums, something she had avoided since Sarah's death. Max lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head when she would sigh or murmur at a particular memory. "This was your mother at your age," Martha told Emma, who sat beside her on the sofa. "See how you have the same smile?" Emma traced her finger over Sarah's gap-toothed grin. Was she scared of things too? The question caught Martha off guard. "Sometimes, I suppose. Everyone gets scared. Max says it's okay to be scared. It's what you do when you're scared that matters." Martha blinked. "Max told you that?" Emma nodded seriously. "Not with words. But I can tell what he's thinking sometimes." She looked down at the German shepherd. "He was really scared at the shelter, scared nobody would understand him anymore. That's how I feel at school sometimes." Martha felt a chill run down her spine, not unpleasant, but strange. She turned the page of the album and froze. The photograph showed Sarah in her early 20s, standing beside a young man in army fatigues. Martha had forgotten this picture existed. It had been taken at a family reunion nearly 15 years ago. "Who's that with Mom?" Emma asked, pointing to the soldier. Martha's mouth felt suddenly dry. "That's your mother's cousin, Jimmy, James Peterson. They were close as children, but lost touch when he joined the army. This was the last time I remember them seeing each other." Emma studied the photograph with unusual intensity. "He looks nice." "He was," Martha said softly. "Very kind." "Always good with animals?" She stared at the young man's smiling face, a half-formed thought nagging at the edges of her mind. "I wonder whatever happened to him." As if responding to her words, Max suddenly sat up, his ears pricked forward. He made a soft, whining sound and pawed gently at the photo album. "That's strange," Martha murmured. "Emma, would you get me my reading glasses from the kitchen counter? I want to look at something." When Emma had left the room, Martha carefully removed the photograph from its sleeve and turned it over. In Sarah's neat handwriting was a date and caption: "Me and cousin Jimmy, July 4th, 2010. Home on leave from Army Dog Training Program." Martha's heart began to pound. Dog training program. It couldn't be a coincidence. When Frank came for his weekly visit 2 days later, Martha showed him the photograph. "James Peterson," she said, watching his face carefully. "My daughter's cousin, Army dog handler." "Does that name mean anything to you?" Frank's eyes widened as he stared at the photo. Sergeant James Peterson? Max's handler? The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath Martha's feet. "You're certain? This is the same man?" Frank nodded slowly. "I never met him personally, but I've seen his service photo in Max's file. This is definitely him." He looked up at Martha, his expression stunned. "Your daughter's cousin was Max's handler, the one who died in Afghanistan?" "Apparently," Martha whispered, the pieces falling into place. "Sarah and Jimmy were close as children. They lost touch when he joined the Army, but—" She swallowed hard. "Sarah named her daughter Emma James. After him, I always assumed, though she never said so directly." Frank sat heavily in the kitchen chair. "This explains the connection. Dogs like Max, they don't just bond with their handlers, they bond with their scent profile. Family members often share similar base scents." "The lavender," Martha murmured. "Exactly. Emma likely has enough of the same scent markers as her second cousin to trigger Max's recognition." Frank shook his head in wonder. "In all my years working with military dogs, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if he was meant to find her," Martha finished softly. "Or she was meant to find him." Frank cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Martha, there's something else you should know. After our last session, I got curious and made some calls to my contacts in the K-9 program. I was trying to find out more about Max's service record." Martha tensed at his serious tone. "What did you discover?" "Sergeant Peterson's body was never recovered from the site of the IED explosion. He was listed as killed in action based on witness reports and the severity of the blast, but technically—" Frank hesitated. "Technically what?" Martha pressed, her heart racing. "Technically, he's still listed as MIA, missing in action, not confirmed dead." Martha's mind reeled with Frank's revelation. James Peterson, Jimmy, possibly still alive. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. If he had survived, where had he been all these years? Why hadn't he contacted his family? "I don't want to give you false hope," Frank cautioned, noting her expression. "MIA doesn't mean alive, just that there wasn't definitive proof of death. After an explosion like that—" He shook his head grimly. "The chances are extremely slim." Martha nodded, trying to process this new information. "Does the military still look for him? After all this time?" "Not actively. It's been nearly 5 years now." Frank's weathered face softened with sympathy. "But his case remains open, if new intelligence ever surfaces." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the back door opening. Emma and Max returned from their afternoon walk, the German shepherd padding protectively beside the child. "Look what Max found, Grandma." Emma held up a perfect robin's egg, her face alight with excitement. "It was on the sidewalk. Do you think it fell from a nest?" Martha forced a smile, tucking away the tumultuous emotions Frank's news had stirred. "It certainly looks that way, sweetheart. Why don't we put it in a safe place?" She caught Frank's eye, silently communicating that their conversation would have to continue later. That night, after Emma was asleep, Martha sat on the porch with a cup of tea, trying to make sense of everything. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes alert, watching the darkened street with vigilant attention. "Did you know?" Martha whispered to the dog. "Somehow. Did you know Emma was connected to him?" Max's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but he offered no other response. The rational part of Martha's mind dismissed the notion as fanciful thinking. Yet there was something so deliberate about the way Max had bonded with Emma, so specific in his devotion, that she couldn't help wondering if some deeper recognition was at work. Sarah had been searching for her cousin before the accident. Martha remembered now. Phone calls, letters sent to his last known address. Family should stick together, Sarah had insisted, especially after Emma was born. Had she known something? Or simply felt the same pull of family connection that Martha now felt? The next few days passed in a blur of normal activities overlaid with Martha's constant preoccupation. She considered contacting military authorities but hesitated. What would she say? That her granddaughter's dog seemed to recognize her, so her long-missing second cousin must be alive. They would think she was a confused old woman, desperate for connection. Instead, she focused on the tangible blessings before her. Emma was speaking more each day, even initiating conversations with classmates. Max continued to thrive, his coat regaining its luster, his confidence growing. The reverse mortgage had stabilized their financial situation for the moment. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, Martha felt a growing sense of urgency, as if time were running out for something important she couldn't quite identify. The weather forecast that weekend called for heavy rain, but no one was prepared for the intensity of the storm that arrived. It began Thursday evening with distant thunder that made Max press himself against Emma's legs, trembling slightly. "It's okay," the child soothed, her small hand steady on his head. "Just noise. You're safe here." By midnight, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the roof with such force that Martha worried about leaks in the aging shingles. She checked the windows, placed buckets under known trouble spots, and tried to ignore the growing unease in her chest. Max's anxiety increased with the storm's intensity. He paced between Emma's bedroom and the windows, whining softly, his body language communicating distress beyond normal thunderstorm fear. "What is it, boy?" Martha asked as she intercepted him on one of his circuits. "What's wrong?" The German shepherd looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver, then returned to Emma's bedside as if compelled to guard her. Martha tried to dismiss her unease as she finally went to bed around 1 a.m. Just a storm, she told herself. Just an anxious dog. But her sleep was fitful, punctuated by vivid dreams of Sarah calling for help from somewhere Martha couldn't reach. The ringing phone jolted her awake at 4:17 a.m. Disoriented, Martha fumbled for the receiver in the darkness. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The voice was unfamiliar, tense with urgency. "This is emergency services. We're issuing a mandatory evacuation for your area. The Millers Creek Dam is at risk of failure. You need to leave immediately." Martha's mind struggled to process the information. "What? The dam? But that's miles away." "Ma'am, if it fails, your entire neighborhood will be underwater within 30 minutes. Emergency shelters are being established at Westside High School and the community center. Please gather essential medications, documents, and leave immediately. Do not delay." The line went dead before Martha could ask more questions. For a moment, she sat frozen in disbelief. Then training from decades of military wifehood kicked in. When emergency strikes, act first, process later. "Emma!" Martha called, already moving despite her arthritic joints protesting the sudden activity. "Emma, wake up! We need to go!" She hobbled down the hall to her granddaughter's room. Emma was already sitting up in bed, Max standing alert beside her, as if he'd sensed the danger before the phone call came. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Emma's voice was small but remarkably steady. "There's a problem with the dam upstream. We need to leave right away." Martha kept her tone calm but firm. "Get your shoes on and grab your backpack. Only essentials." To Martha's relief, Emma didn't panic or argue. The child slipped out of bed and began pulling on clothes while Martha hurried to gather medications, insurance papers, and the photo albums that contained irreplaceable memories. Outside, emergency sirens began to wail, their mournful sound cutting through the pounding rain. Neighbors' lights were coming on, cars starting. The evacuation was underway. Martha stuffed their documents and medications into a waterproof bag, added a change of clothes for each of them, and grabbed the emergency cash she kept hidden in a kitchen canister. She was reaching for her car keys when a deafening crack of thunder shook the house. The lights flickered and died. "Power's out," Martha called, feeling her way back to Emma's room in the darkness. "Don't worry, I have a flashlight in my purse." The beam illuminated Emma standing ready with her backpack, Max pressed against her side. The German shepherd's posture was alert but controlled, his training evident in the way he remained focused despite his natural fear of the storm. "Good boy," Martha murmured, reaching down to touch his head briefly. "Let's go." They made their way carefully down the stairs and to the front door. The rain was coming down in blinding sheets, the wind howling around the corners of the house. Martha's ancient Buick sat in the driveway, suddenly looking fragile in the face of nature's fury. "We'll be fine," Martha assured Emma, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "The high school isn't far. We'll be there in 10 minutes. They dashed through the downpour to the car, Max keeping close to Emma's side. Martha's fingers trembled as she inserted the key into the ignition. Nothing happened. She tried again, muttering a prayer under her breath. The engine made a weak, grinding sound, then fell silent. "Not now," Martha whispered, panic fluttering in her chest. "Please, not now." She tried once more with the same result. The battery, which she'd been meaning to replace for months, had finally given out. Martha closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to think. Their neighbors, the Wilsons, had already left, their driveway empty. The Hendersons across the street didn't drive anymore. Elaine next door. As if summoned by her thoughts, headlights swept across the driveway as Elaine's SUV backed out of her garage. Martha grabbed the flashlight and stepped out into the rain, waving frantically. "Elaine, wait!" The SUV paused, the passenger window rolling down. Elaine's anxious face appeared. "Martha, what are you doing? We need to evacuate." "My car won't start. Can you take us to the shelter?" Elaine's expression shifted, her gaze moving from Martha to Emma and finally to Max, who stood protectively beside the child. "I don't have room for that dog, Martha. He's too big." "We can't leave him," Martha insisted, rain streaming down her face. "He's Emma's therapy dog." Elaine shook her head. "I'm sorry, but Phil's mother is with us, and she's terrified of large dogs. It's either you and Emma, or none of you." Martha felt Emma's small hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. "We're not leaving, Max," the child said, her voice quiet but firm. Elaine's face softened with reluctant sympathy. "Martha, be reasonable. It's an animal. This is an emergency." "He's family," Martha replied, straightening her spine despite the rain soaking through her clothes. "We'll find another way." Elaine sighed heavily. "The National Guard is setting up at the end of Oak Street. Maybe they can help." With that, she rolled up her window and drove away, taillights disappearing into the curtain of rain. Martha stood for a moment, water streaming down her face, weighing their options. Oak Street was 10 blocks away, a long walk in this weather, especially with her arthritis. But staying wasn't a choice, not with the dam at risk. "We're going to walk to the guard station," she told Emma, forcing confidence into her voice. "Max will help us. We'll be okay." Emma nodded solemnly, her small face pale but determined. "I'm not scared, Grandma. Max will protect us." As if understanding his responsibility, Max moved into position beside Emma, his body language alert and focused. Despite the thunder that made him flinch, his training was evident in every line of his powerful body. They set out into the storm, Martha leading with the flashlight, Emma and Max close behind. The rain was relentless, reducing visibility to mere feet. Wind gusts threatened to knock Martha off her balance. Her arthritic knees protested each step, pain shooting up her legs. They had gone only 3 blocks when Martha heard it, a low, distant rumble distinct from the thunder. She froze, heart pounding. "What's that noise, Grandma?" Emma asked, pressing closer to Max. Before Martha could answer, emergency sirens began wailing with new urgency, their pitch different from the evacuation alert, higher, more insistent. "Dam failure imminent," crackled a voice from a passing emergency vehicle's loudspeaker. "Seek high ground immediately. Dam failure imminent." The rumble grew louder, like an approaching train. Martha felt terror close her throat as she realized what was happening. The dam had failed sooner than expected. The floodwaters were coming. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. "We need to get to higher ground." They turned away from Oak Street, heading instead toward Prospect Hill, the highest point in the neighborhood. Martha's legs burned with the effort, each step agony, but fear drove her forward. Behind them, the rumble became a roar. A wall of water surged around the corner, carrying debris, branches, trash cans, parts of fences, in its churning path. "We're not going to make it," Martha realized with sickening clarity. The floodwaters were moving too fast, and they were still blocks from the hill. Max barked sharply, once, twice, then grabbed Emma's sleeve in his teeth, pulling her toward a 2-story house with a covered porch. The Jefferson place, Martha recognized, vacant since old Mr. Jefferson had moved to assisted living last year. Understanding flashed between Martha and the German shepherd. Higher ground. Get inside. Get upstairs. "Follow Max!" Martha shouted to Emma over the roar of water and wind. They splashed through deepening water to the porch. The front door was locked, but a side window had been boarded up after vandals broke it months ago. The plywood covering was loose, partially pulled away from the frame. Without hesitation, Max braced his powerful body against the board and pushed. The nails screeched as they pulled free, creating an opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. "Go, Emma," Martha urged, boosting her granddaughter through the window. Max followed, leaping through with athletic grace despite his still healing body. Martha was halfway through when she heard an ominous crack. She looked over her shoulder and felt her blood freeze. The floodwaters had reached the porch, carrying a large section of fencing that slammed into the support posts. The entire structure groaned, beginning to pull away from the house. "Grandma!" Emma screamed from inside. With a final desperate effort, Martha pulled herself through the window just as the porch collapsed with a thunderous crash. Water immediately began pouring through the broken window, rising quickly inside the house. "Upstairs!" Martha gasped, pushing Emma toward the staircase. "Hurry!" They scrambled up the stairs, Martha's legs threatening to give out beneath her. Max stayed between them, somehow sensing that Emma needed to go first, but Martha needed assistance. When her foot slipped on the wet stairs, the German shepherd was there, his solid body providing support until she regained her balance. They reached the second floor as water continued to rise below, already covering the first 3 steps of the staircase. The sound was deafening, rushing water, cracking wood, the constant drumming of rain on the roof. "In here," Martha directed, opening the door to what appeared to be a bedroom. Away from the windows. The room was dusty and unfurnished except for a built-in window seat beneath a dormer window. They huddled there, watching in horror as the water continued to rise downstairs. "Are we going to be okay?" Emma asked, her voice small but remarkably steady. Martha pulled her close, wishing she could promise safety. "We're high enough now. The water shouldn't reach the second floor." She prayed she was right. Max positioned himself at the doorway, his body tense and alert, watching the rising water at the top of the stairs. Every few minutes he would turn to check on Emma, then resume his vigilant watch. "He's still on duty," Martha thought with a surge of gratitude and admiration. Even now, terrified of the storm, the dog's training and protective instinct remained intact. Hours passed in tense waiting. The water rose to the top of the stairs, but thankfully no further. The rain continued unabated. Martha's clothes were soaked through, and she worried about Emma developing hypothermia. They had no dry blankets, no way to warm themselves. As if sensing her concern, Max abandoned his post at the doorway and came to lie beside Emma, pressing his warm body against hers. The child curled against him gratefully. "He's like a furnace, Grandma," Emma murmured, her hands buried in his thick fur. Martha managed to smile despite her fear. Working dogs have to stay warm. It's part of their design. As dawn approached, the rain finally began to slacken. Through the dormer window, Martha could see the extent of the flooding, entire streets transformed into rivers, debris floating past, houses standing like islands in a newly formed lake. Her thoughts turned to their own home. Was it still standing? Had the floodwaters reached the second floor where their precious photographs and mementos were stored? The practical concerns helped distract her from their immediate danger. Max suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Martha whispered, straining to hear over the still falling rain. The German shepherd stood, moving back to the doorway. His posture was alert but not aggressive. Something had caught his attention. Then Martha heard it too, the distant sound of a helicopter. Search and rescue was underway. "We're going to be okay," she told Emma, hope surging in her chest. "They're looking for people now." But the helicopter sound faded, moving to a different part of the neighborhood. Martha's hope dimmed slightly. How would rescuers know they were here, in an abandoned house? Max made a decision. With one last look at Emma, he turned and descended the stairs, the water reaching halfway up his legs. "Max!" Emma called, alarmed. "Come back!" The German shepherd paused, looking back at them with an expression Martha could only describe as determination. Then he continued down the stairs, disappearing from view. "Where's he going?" Emma cried, starting to rise. Martha held her back. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we need to stay here where it's safe. Max knows what he's doing." She hoped her words were true. The minutes stretched painfully as they waited, listening to the sounds of water and distant rescue operations. Emma grew increasingly agitated, convinced Max had been swept away by the floodwaters. "He'll come back," Martha assured her, with more confidence than she felt. "He wouldn't leave you." Nearly 40 minutes later they heard it, a sharp, distinctive barking pattern. 3 quick barks. Pause. 3 more barks. Again and again, the sound carrying clearly over the diminishing rain. "That's Max!" Emma exclaimed, rushing to the window. Below, standing on what remained of the front porch roof, now just barely above the waterline, was Max. His fur was soaked, his body visibly trembling with exertion, but he continued the barking pattern with military precision. A rescue boat appeared around the corner, 2 men in orange vests scanning the houses. When they heard Max's barking, they turned the boat toward the Jefferson house. "He's bringing help," Martha whispered, amazed. "He went for help." The rescue workers spotted them at the window and waved, signaling they'd been seen. One of them reached down to help Max into the boat, but the German shepherd refused, continuing his barking until he was certain the rescuers were heading to the right house. Only then did he allow himself to be pulled aboard. "Your dog led us right to you," the first rescuer explained after they'd helped Martha and Emma carefully down to the boat. "We were 3 blocks over when we heard him." "Most consistent barking pattern I've ever heard, like he was trained for this." "He was," Martha said simply, wrapping a space blanket around Emma's shoulders. "He's a military dog." Max, exhausted but vigilant, pressed himself against Emma's legs. his mission complete but his guard duty never ending. The rescue boat carried them through the flooded streets to a collection point where National Guard trucks waited to transport evacuees to emergency shelters. Despite his obvious exhaustion, Max remained alert, staying close to Emma as they climbed aboard a transport vehicle. As they drove away from their devastated neighborhood, Martha caught a glimpse of their street. Water covered everything except the highest rooftops. Their little house was completely submerged up to the second-floor windows. Everything they owned, furniture, clothes, appliances, would be destroyed. The photo albums she'd left behind, the mementos of Robert and Sarah, all ruined. Only what they carried with them remained. Martha felt a moment of overwhelming grief, then looked at Emma and Max huddled together under the space blanket. The most precious things had been saved. Everything else was just stuff. At the emergency shelter, set up in the West Side High School gymnasium, chaos reigned. Hundreds of displaced residents filled the space, some crying, others in shock, volunteers rushing to distribute blankets, food, and information. A harried-looking woman with a clipboard approached them as they entered. "Names, please, and any medical conditions we should know about?" "Martha Reynolds, Emma Reynolds, and Max." Martha supplied the information, realizing with a start that she'd included the dog without hesitation. "I have arthritis and high blood pressure. Emma is 8 and has no medical conditions. Max is a service animal." The woman glanced at the German Shepherd with obvious skepticism. "We have a designated area for pets. He stays with us," Martha said firmly. "He's a military service dog and Emma's therapy animal. He just saved our lives." Something in Martha's tone must have conveyed the futility of argument. The woman nodded tersely and directed them to a corner of the gymnasium where cots were being set up. As they made their way across the crowded space, Martha was struck by the devastation on people's faces. Entire lives disrupted in a single night, homes lost, possessions destroyed, the future suddenly uncertain. Yet, looking at Emma, walking tall beside Max, her face composed despite everything she'd endured, Martha felt a surge of fierce pride. They would rebuild. Somehow, they would find a way forward. They had each other, they had Max, and for now that was enough. 3 days passed in the crowded emergency shelter. The gymnasium had been transformed into a makeshift living space with hundreds of cots arranged in rows, portable shower units set up in the locker rooms, and the cafeteria serving round-the-clock meals to displaced residents. Martha found the noise and lack of privacy almost unbearable. Her arthritic joints ached from sleeping on the thin cot, and the constant anxiety about their future left her exhausted. But she maintained a brave face for Emma's sake, grateful they had survived when others had lost so much more. Max had become something of a celebrity in the shelter. Word of how he had led rescuers to Martha and Emma spread quickly, and many residents stopped by their corner to meet the heroic German Shepherd. To Martha's surprise, shelter officials had abandoned their initial insistence that Max stay in the designated pet area. His calm, dignified presence and obvious service training had earned him an exception. "Your dog is remarkable," said Dr. Lillian Chen, a volunteer physician who had come to check on Martha's blood pressure. "Military background, you said?" Martha nodded, watching as Max lay alert but relaxed beside Emma's cot. "Afghanistan. He saved his unit during an ambush, then pulled 3 soldiers from a burning vehicle after an IED strike." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And now he's saved you and Emma. Some animals just seem born to protect." She finished taking Martha's blood pressure and frowned. "Your numbers are quite elevated, Mrs. Reynolds. Are you taking your medication regularly?" Martha hesitated. The truth was, she had only 3 days of medication left in the emergency supply she'd grabbed before evacuating. Her prescription bottles, along with nearly everything else they owned, were underwater in their home. "I have enough for a few more days," she admitted. "After that," Dr. Chen patted her hand sympathetically, "we'll make sure you get what you need." FEMA representatives are arriving tomorrow to help with emergency assistance applications. They can expedite prescription refills for evacuees. Martha thanked her, though the mention of FEMA applications added another layer of worry. She'd need to start the insurance claims process, apply for disaster relief, figure out temporary housing once the shelter closed. The mountain of bureaucracy ahead seemed insurmountable. That evening, as Emma slept soundly with Max keeping watch, Martha sat on her cot studying the FEMA paperwork a volunteer had distributed. The forms were confusing, filled with legal language and requirements for documentation she no longer possessed. "Need some help with those?" Martha looked up to see Frank Williams standing beside her cot, his familiar face a welcome sight amid the chaos. "Frank, I was wondering if you'd been affected by the flooding." She gestured for him to sit. He settled onto the edge of the cot with a weary sigh. "My apartment's on high ground, thankfully. I've been volunteering with the rescue teams." He nodded toward Emma and Max. "I heard about what happened. That dog is something special." "He saved our lives," Martha said simply. "I don't know how he knew to find help, but he did." Frank smiled slightly. "Military working dogs are trained for all kinds of scenarios, including disaster response. Max was just doing what he was trained to do." His expression grew more serious. "But I'm actually here with some news. Is Emma asleep? This might be better discussed privately." Martha glanced at her granddaughter's peaceful form. "She's out cold. Exhaustion, I think. What is it?" Frank leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "I've been making calls about Sergeant Peterson, following up on what we discovered before the flood. There's been a development." Martha's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of development?" "A veterans support group in Baltimore has been working with a John Doe patient at the VA hospital there. Man with severe injuries and memory loss from an IED explosion in Afghanistan 5 years ago." Frank's eyes held hers steadily. "They think it might be Peterson." The world seemed to tilt beneath Martha. "Jimmy? Alive?" The possibility was almost too much to comprehend. "How? I mean, they said he was killed in action." "His unit was ambushed. The explosion was massive, multiple casualties. In the chaos, with partial remains—" Frank shook his head grimly. "Mistakes happen in war zones. This man was found by local villagers, barely alive, unrecognizable from burns and shrapnel wounds. No tags, no identification. By the time he reached a field hospital, Peterson had already been declared KIA." Martha's mind reeled with the implications. Does he remember? Does he know who he is? That's the thing. He's had severe traumatic brain injury. His memory has been coming back in fragments over the past year, but it's incomplete. He remembers training a military dog, remembers the name Max. The support group has been trying to piece together his identity. Frank paused. "They found an article about Max in the local paper, the one from when he alerted to Mrs. Henderson's heart condition. They reached out to the shelter, and Barbara called me." Hope and fear warred in Martha's chest. "So it might be Jimmy? Sarah's cousin?" "It's possible. The timing fits, the military service fits, and the connection to Max is compelling. But—" Frank hesitated. "But what?" "He's severely disabled, Martha. Burns over 40% of his body. Lost his right leg below the knee. The brain injury has left him with speech difficulties, cognitive issues. He's not the same young man you knew." Martha thought of Robert, of how Vietnam had changed him, of how love had remained despite those changes. "If it's Jimmy, he's family." "Whatever condition he's in?" Frank nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "The Baltimore VA is sending his DNA profile to be compared with military records. That should confirm his identity one way or another." "How long?" "A few weeks, normally. But with the flooding, Frank shrugged, everything's delayed, and even if it is Peterson, there would be questions about Max's legal ownership. The military technically still has claim to him. Martha glanced at the German shepherd who had raised his head as if sensing he was being discussed. They were going to euthanize him, she said quietly. They'd written him off as too damaged to save. I know. But if Peterson is alive, and if he's Max's original handler... Frank left the implication hanging. The possibility of losing Max sent a spike of panic through Martha's chest. Emma had already lost so much, her mother, their home, her sense of security. Losing Max now might break her completely. "What should we do?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Frank considered for a moment. "Nothing for now. Wait for the DNA confirmation. Focus on getting back on your feet after the flood." He stood, squeezing her shoulder gently. "I just thought you should know. I'll keep you updated if I hear anything more." After Frank left, Martha sat motionless, overwhelmed by this new complication. If Jimmy was alive, if he was the man in Baltimore, what did that mean for them? For Max? For Emma? The questions swirled in her mind until exhaustion finally pulled her into uneasy sleep. The next morning brought new challenges. FEMA representatives arrived to process assistance applications, and Martha spent hours in line with hundreds of other displaced residents. "Address of damaged property?" asked the tired-looking man behind the folding table. 1247 Sycamore Lane, Martha replied, adjusting her reading glasses to see the form better. "Nature of damage?" "Total..." "The water reached the second floor." The FEMA worker nodded without looking up, checking boxes on his form. "Do you have homeowner's insurance?" "Yes, but I don't have the policy number. All my documents were in the house." "We can look that up with your social security number." He took down the information, then asked, "Will you be staying with family while your claim is processed?" Martha hesitated. "No, I don't have family nearby. Just my granddaughter." "Parents?" "Her mother, my daughter, passed away 3 years ago. Her father isn't in the picture." The worker looked up for the first time, his expression softening slightly. "I see. And the reverse mortgage you mentioned, that complicates things for rebuilding assistance." Martha's heart sank. She'd explained about the reverse mortgage, taken out just weeks before the flood. "Will that disqualify us from help?" "Not entirely, but it limits some options. Since you don't technically own the home outright anymore, certain rebuilding grants won't apply." He shuffled through some papers. "You'll qualify for emergency housing assistance, though. There are temporary FEMA trailers being set up at the community college campus. You could be placed there within a week." A trailer. Martha tried to imagine herself, Emma, and Max in one of the small emergency units she'd seen on the news after other disasters. Better than the shelter gymnasium, certainly, but a far cry from the home they'd lost. "What about my granddaughter's school? And her dog? He's a service animal. He would need to stay with us." The worker made a note. "We can try to place you in a unit near her school district. As for the dog, service animals are permitted, but space will be tight." "How big is he?" "German shepherd," Martha said, already imagining the challenges. "But he's very well trained." After finishing the FEMA application, Martha moved to another line for Red Cross assistance. By the time she returned to their cots, her legs were aching and her spirit depleted. Emma was sitting cross-legged on her cot, Max beside her, a young woman in a volunteer's vest sitting across from them. "Grandma!" Emma called, more animation in her voice than Martha had heard since the flood. "This is Miss Kelly. She's a social worker. She wants to talk to us about something important." Martha approached warily. In her experience, social workers often meant complications, especially for older guardians raising grandchildren. "Mrs. Reynolds," the woman greeted her, standing to shake hands. "I'm Angela Kelly from Child Protective Services. I understand you and Emma have been through quite an ordeal." Martha's guard immediately went up. "We're managing," she said stiffly. "Emma is well cared for, Mrs." Kelly's expression remained professionally neutral. "I'm sure she is. However, we routinely check on children in emergency shelters, especially those who might have special needs or circumstances." She glanced at Max, then back to Martha. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Martha's stomach clenched with fear, but she nodded. They stepped a few feet away, still within sight of Emma, but out of earshot. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'll be direct," Mrs. Kelly began. "We have concerns about Emma's living situation. You've lost your home, you're on a fixed income with health issues of your own, and you're now facing indefinite displacement." Martha felt defensive heat rise in her cheeks. "I've raised that child since she was 5 years old. We've weathered hardships before. I understand, and Emma clearly has a strong bond with you, but our priority must be her long-term welfare." Mrs. Kelly's voice remained gentle but firm. "There's also the matter of the dog. Max is her therapy animal. He's been crucial to her emotional recovery after her mother's death. So I've heard. But FEMA housing is extremely limited in space. A large dog, regardless of how well trained, presents challenges." Martha straightened her spine, ignoring the pain in her lower back. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Kelly?" The social worker sighed. "We have a foster family willing to take Emma temporarily, just until you're more settled. They have a lovely home in a good school district, plenty of space." "Absolutely not," Martha interrupted, her voice low but intense. "I am not separating from my granddaughter. Not now, not ever. Mrs. Reynolds, please understand." "No, you understand. That child has lost her mother, her home, and nearly everything she owns. The one thing keeping her from completely withdrawing is that dog and her relationship with me." Martha felt tears threatening but forced them back. "Taking her away now would destroy what progress she's made." Mrs. Kelly studied her for a long moment. "The foster placement would allow her to keep attending her current school. The family has a fenced yard and is open to the dog visiting. It would just be temporary, a few months at most while you secure stable housing." "And where would Max go during this temporary arrangement?" "Well, there are boarding facilities." "Boarding facilities," Martha repeated flatly, "for a military service dog with PTSD who just saved our lives." Ms. Kelly had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I understand your attachment to the animal, but we need to prioritize Emma's needs." "Max is one of her needs," Martha insisted. "Ask any of the shelter volunteers how she's been since the flood. She's talking, she's processing what happened, she's coping. Because of Max, take him away and you'll undo months of progress." The social worker made a note in her file. "I'll document your concerns, Mrs. Reynolds, but I should warn you that if your housing situation isn't resolved within 30 days, we may need to revisit this conversation. Child Protective Services has the authority to intervene if we believe a child's welfare is at risk." After Miss Kelly left, Martha returned to Emma with a forced smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just grown-up talk." Emma's perceptive eyes studied her grandmother's face. "Are they going to take me away from you?" Martha's heart broke at the question. "No, of course not. We're family. We stay together." "And Max, too?" Emma pressed, her hand buried in the German shepherd's fur. Martha hesitated, unwilling to make promises she might not be able to keep. "Max is part of our family now. We'll do everything possible to keep him with us." That night, Martha lay awake on her uncomfortable cot, the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a physical force. They had lost their home. The reverse mortgage complicated their rebuilding options. FEMA housing might not accommodate Max. Child Protective Services was watching. And somewhere in Baltimore, a broken soldier who might be Jimmy Peterson was slowly remembering his connection to the dog who had become Emma's lifeline. It was too much. The challenges too numerous, the resources too few. For the first time since Robert's death, Martha felt herself slipping toward despair. A soft whine broke through her dark thoughts. Max stood beside her cot, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. The German shepherd nudged her hand gently, then looked toward the shelter exit. Martha frowned. "You need to go out?" Max nudged her again, more insistently. Sighing, Martha rose and grabbed her sweater. It was well past midnight, but the shelter had a designated dog relief area just outside the gymnasium doors. As they walked through the darkened shelter, Max stayed close to her side, guiding her between the rows of sleeping evacuees with surprising care. Outside, the night air was cool and clean after days of rain. Stars had emerged between scattered clouds, and the flooding that had devastated their neighborhood seemed distant from this quiet corner of the high school grounds. Max led her to the small grassy area, but showed no interest in using it. Instead, he sat beside her, looking up at the stars. "What's going on with you?" Martha murmured, confused by his behavior. The German shepherd leaned against her leg, a warm, solid presence in the darkness. And suddenly, Martha understood. He hadn't needed to go out. He had sensed her despair and brought her outside to break its hold. Away from the stifling shelter, under the vast canopy of stars, her problems seemed less overwhelming. "You're looking out for me too, aren't you?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes as she stroked his head. "Not just Emma, both of us." Max pressed closer, his body warm against her cold legs. Martha looked up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed her joys and sorrows for 68 years. The same stars that had shone over Afghanistan when Max had fought to save his unit, over the highway where Sarah had died, over the flooded streets they had just survived. "We're still here," she whispered to the night sky. "Still standing, still fighting." And in that moment, Martha made a decision. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices she had to make, she would keep their family together. Emma, Max, and herself. They had survived too much to be separated now. The next morning, Martha approached the shelter coordinator with renewed determination. "I need to make a phone call to Baltimore," she said. "It's urgent family business." The call to the Baltimore VA hospital took nearly an hour to arrange. The shelter's emergency phones were in constant use, and the cellular networks remained overloaded from the disaster. When Martha finally got through, she was transferred multiple times before reaching the Veterans Support Coordinator. "My name is Martha Reynolds," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm calling about a patient you may have there, a John Doe with injuries from Afghanistan. I believe he might be my daughter's cousin, James Peterson." A long pause followed. "Ma'am, I can't confirm or deny specific patient information without proper authorization." "I understand," Martha said, fighting to keep frustration from her voice. "But this is important. James was a military dog handler. His canine partner was named Max, a German shepherd. The dog is with us now." Another pause, longer this time. "One moment, please." Martha waited, her hand trembling slightly as she held the receiver. After what seemed an eternity, a new voice came on the line, deeper with a clinical precision. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Dr. Howard Brennan, Chief of Neurological Rehabilitation. I understand you have information about our John Doe patient?" "Yes," Martha said, relief washing over her. "I believe he may be James Peterson, my late daughter's cousin. He served in Afghanistan as a dog handler for a German shepherd named Max." "I see." Dr. Brennan's tone remained neutral. "What makes you think our patient might be this James Peterson?" Martha explained everything. The connection between Max and Emma, Frank's research into Max's history, the discovery that Peterson had been declared KIA without a body. "Our patient has been with us for nearly 5 years," Dr. Brennan said when she finished. "He suffered catastrophic injuries from an IED explosion, third-degree burns over 40% of his body, right leg amputated below the knee, severe traumatic brain injury. His memory has been severely compromised, though we've seen improvement in the past year." Martha's throat tightened at the description. "What does he remember?" "Fragments, mostly. Military service, training a dog. He becomes agitated when certain news reports about Afghanistan air on the television. Recently, he's been repeating a name, Sarah. We thought it might be a wife or girlfriend." "Sarah was his cousin," Martha whispered. "They were close as children." Dr. Brennan's voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Reynolds, I should caution you, even if our patient is your James Peterson, he's not the same person you knew. Brain injuries of this magnitude change people fundamentally. His speech is impaired, his cognitive functions limited. He requires assistance with many daily activities." "I understand," Martha said. "My husband came back from Vietnam with his own wounds. Not as severe, perhaps, but I know something about loving someone through their damage." After a moment of silence, Dr. Brennan said, "There's been a development you should know about. Our patient saw a news report yesterday about the flooding in your area. When footage of the rescue efforts appeared, he became extremely agitated, pointing at the screen and attempting to speak. We later realized a German shepherd was visible in some of the footage, a dog helping rescuers locate survivors." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Max? They showed Max on the news?" "Apparently. Our patient had the strongest reaction we've seen in years. He kept repeating what sounded like Max and find. We've been trying to locate information about military working dogs in the flood zone since then." The implications staggered Martha. Jimmy, if it was Jimmy, had recognized Max on television across hundreds of miles after 5 years of separation and devastating injuries. "What happens now?" she asked. "Normally, we would proceed with DNA verification, which takes time. But given the circumstances and the patient's strong reaction, I'd like to try something more immediate." Dr. Brennan hesitated. "Would it be possible for you to send a current photograph of the dog, and perhaps an audio recording of his name being called? Familiar sensory inputs can sometimes trigger significant memory responses." "Yes, of course," Martha agreed immediately. "But would it be possible to arrange a video call? If we could see each other, even briefly." "That's moving rather quickly, Mrs. Reynolds. I'd need to evaluate his readiness for such an encounter." "Please," Martha said, abandoning pride. "We've just lost our home in the flooding. Child Protective Services is threatening to take my granddaughter because of our unstable housing situation. And there are questions about Max's legal ownership that could result in him being taken from us. We need answers quickly." Dr. Brennan was silent for a moment. "I understand your urgency, but my patient's well-being must be my priority. Let's start with the photo and recording. Based on his reaction, we can discuss next steps." Martha agreed, thanking him profusely before hanging up. As she turned from the phone, she found Emma standing nearby, Max at her side. "Who were you calling, Grandma?" the child asked, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. Martha considered how much to share. Emma had endured so much already. Was it fair to burden her with this uncertainty as well? But keeping secrets had never served them well. "I was calling about Max's first person," she said gently. "The soldier who trained him in Afghanistan." Emma's eyes widened. "I thought he died. We all did. But there's a chance he survived, that he's been in a hospital all this time, unable to remember who he is." Emma absorbed this with remarkable composure. "Is he coming to get Max?" The question cut straight to the heart of Martha's fears. "I don't know, sweetheart. Right now, the doctors are just trying to figure out if it's really him. But if it is, Emma pressed, her hand tightening in Max's fur. Martha knelt, ignoring her protesting knees, to look Emma in the eye. If it is, then we have a family member who needs us. And family helps family. Emma considered this, her young face solemn. Like Max helped us in the flood? Exactly like that. Would we have to give him back? Martha wished she had a reassuring answer. I don't know, but what I do know is that Max loves you, and no matter what happens, that love is real. No one can take that away. Emma nodded, accepting this imperfect comfort with the resilience that continually amazed Martha. Can I help with the picture and recording? Max listens best to me. Together, they borrowed a shelter volunteer's smartphone to take photos of Max and record Emma calling his name. Martha sent these to Dr. Brennan with a brief prayer that they might bring clarity, one way or another. 2 days later, Martha was helping distribute lunch in the shelter cafeteria when Frank appeared at her elbow, his expression urgent. You need to come with me, he said quietly. Dr. Brennan from Baltimore is on a video call. He says it's important. Martha's heart leapt into her throat. Now, did he say what? Just that it couldn't wait. I've already collected Emma and Max from the children's activity area. They hurried to the shelter's administrative office, where a laptop had been set up on a desk. Emma was already seated before it, Max sitting attentively beside her. On the screen was Dr. Brennan, his gray hair neatly combed, his expression professionally composed. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for joining us. As I explained to your friend Mr. Williams, we've had a significant development. What kind of development? Martha asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Our patient had an extraordinary response to the materials you sent. When he heard the recording of Max's name, he became extremely animated, more responsive than we've seen in years. He's been writing the same words repeatedly since then. Max, Emma, Sarah, and Martha. Martha's knees weakened. He wrote my name? But how would he? We believe the photos triggered cascading memory recovery. He's been using a communication board to express that he wants to speak with you directly. Dr. Brennan's professional demeanor softened slightly. I should prepare you. His appearance may be shocking. The burns have left significant scarring, and his speech is difficult to understand, but his cognitive function has shown remarkable improvement in just the past 48 hours. Martha nodded, steeling herself. We're ready. Dr. Brennan moved away from the camera, and the screen shifted to show a hospital room. Seated in a wheelchair was a man Martha barely recognized. His face was a landscape of scar tissue, one ear partially missing, his right leg ending at mid-calf. What remained of his hair was cut short, revealing more scarring on his scalp. But his eyes, those were Jimmy's eyes, the same deep blue that Sarah had inherited, that Emma had in turn. Jimmy? Martha whispered, her voice breaking. The man in the wheelchair leaned forward, his scarred hand lifting in a small wave. Martha, he said, the word slurred but recognizable. Found you. Emma pressed closer to the screen, her eyes wide. Are you Max's first person? A smile transformed the scarred face, bringing Jimmy's features into sharper focus beneath the damage. Yes, he managed, the word clearer than the others. Then, with visible effort, Max, good boy. At the sound of his name in that voice, Max's reaction was immediate and profound. His ears shot forward, his body tensed, and a high whine escaped his throat. He pressed his nose to the screen, tail wagging with such force his entire body shook. He remembers you, Emma said, wonder in her voice. Jimmy nodded, tears tracking down his scarred cheeks. With trembling hands, he held up a communication board and pointed to several symbols in sequence. Dr. Brennan translated. He's saying, Max saved me. Now he saved you." Martha couldn't hold back her tears. "Yes, Jimmy, he did. He found us, just like he found you." For the next 15 minutes, they communicated through a combination of Jimmy's halting speech, his communication board, and Dr. Brennan's translations. The story emerged in fragments. Jimmy had been thrown clear of the vehicle during the explosion, grievously injured but alive. Local villagers had found him and kept him hidden, fearing Taliban retribution if they were discovered helping an American. By the time he reached a field hospital via an aid worker, he was unrecognizable and without identification. No. Tags, Jimmy managed to explain. Lost. In blast. His dog tags were missing, and his uniform was largely destroyed, Dr. Brennan clarified. Combined with his severe injuries and the fact that partial remains were recovered from the explosion site, it led to his mistaken identification as KIA. "But what about dental records? DNA?" Frank asked, speaking for the first time. "Afghanistan, 2017, Dr. Brennan replied simply. "In an active war zone with multiple casualties, full verification protocols sometimes falter." By the time he reached a U.S. military hospital, Sergeant Peterson had already been declared killed in action, and his remains, what they believed were his remains, sent home. Jimmy pointed to more symbols on his board. "He's asking about Sarah," Dr. Brennan translated. "He remembers she was searching for him before his deployment." Martha's throat tightened painfully. "Jimmy, I'm so sorry. Sarah, there was an accident 3 years ago. She's gone." Jimmy closed his eyes, grief washing over his scarred features. When he opened them again, they fixed on Emma with unmistakable recognition. "Sarah's girl," he said. "Emma." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mom told me about you. She said you were brave." A tear slid down Jimmy's cheek as he pointed to his communication board again. "He says Sarah was braver," Dr. Brennan translated. The conversation continued, halting but profound. Jimmy explained that his memories had been returning gradually over the past year, accelerated by therapy and treatments. The news footage of Max had triggered a breakthrough. "I knew," he said, the words coming more easily now, as if the connection was strengthening his ability to speak. "Knew, my dog, knew, had to find you." "Well, he found us first," Martha said, smiling through her tears. "He saved Emma and me during the flood, led rescuers right to us." Jimmy's face lit with pride. "Good. Boy. Best. Boy." As their allotted time drew to a close, Dr. Brennan returned to the screen. "I know you have many questions about next steps," he said. "The DNA verification is still pending, but given today's interaction, I think we can proceed on the assumption that our patient is indeed James Peterson." "What happens now?" Martha asked, the question encompassing the enormity of their situation. "Sergeant Peterson is entitled to full military benefits, including disability compensation, which should be retroactive once his identity is confirmed. There will be paperwork, of course, and likely media attention given the unusual circumstances." Dr. Brennan glanced off camera, presumably at Jimmy. "He's also expressing a strong desire to be transferred to a facility closer to you." Martha's mind raced. Their home was destroyed. They were living in a shelter. CPS was questioning her ability to care for Emma. And now Jimmy, disabled, requiring specialized care, wanted to be near them. "We're currently displaced by flooding," she explained. "Our housing situation is uncertain." "I understand, but these matters take time to arrange. By the time a transfer could be approved and implemented, perhaps your situation will have stabilized." Dr. Brennan's expression softened. "Mrs. Reynolds, Your family has already been separated by war and mistaken identity for 5 years. I believe further separation would be detrimental to everyone's recovery." Martha nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "Thank you, Doctor. Please tell Jimmy we want him close as soon as possible." After ending the call, Martha sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had happened. Jimmy was alive. After 5 years, countless surgeries, and a case of mistaken identity, Sarah's cousin had found his way back to them, through Max. "Is he really my cousin?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. "Your second cousin," Martha corrected gently. "Your mother and Jimmy were first cousins. They grew up together, almost like brother and sister." Emma considered this. "So he's family? Really family?" "Yes, sweetheart. He's really family." Emma's next question cut straight to the heart of their most pressing concern. "Will he take Max away from us?" Martha exchanged glances with Frank, who had remained respectfully silent during the emotional reunion. "Legally," Frank said carefully, "Max was assigned to Sergeant Peterson. With his status changing from KIA to alive, the military might recognize his claim to Max." Emma's face crumpled. "But Max is ours now. He saved us." "I don't think Jimmy would take Max from you," Martha said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "He saw how Max responded to you, how you responded to Max. Family doesn't hurt family that way." But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Martha wondered if she was right. Jimmy had lost everything: his health, 5 years of his life, his cousin Sarah. Max represented his only connection to his life before the explosion. Could he give that up? Frank cleared his throat. "There might be a solution. Military working dogs sometimes serve multiple handlers during their careers, and in cases where a handler is injured, arrangements are often made for the dog to split time between the handler's family and new duties." "You mean share him?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed. "Something like that?" "But let's not get ahead of ourselves." Frank patted Emma's shoulder. "Right now, we need to focus on getting your housing situation sorted out. One problem at a time." As if on cue, Martha's cell phone rang, a prepaid emergency phone provided by the Red Cross. The caller ID showed FEMA assistance. "Mrs. Reynolds?" said the official-sounding voice when she answered. "This is Thomas Grayson from FEMA Housing Assistance. I'm calling about your application for temporary housing." "Yes?" Martha said, bracing herself for more complications. "We've reviewed your situation, particularly the fact that you're caring for a minor child and require space for a service animal. We've allocated a 3-bedroom mobile unit for your family. It should be ready for occupancy within 48 hours. Relief washed over Martha. 3 bedrooms. I thought the units were much smaller. Standard units are 2-bedroom, but given your circumstances and the special needs accommodation for the service animal, we've assigned you one of our accessible units. It has wider doorways, a ramp entry, and additional space for mobility devices." Martha's mind immediately went to Jimmy with his wheelchair and prosthetic leg. It was as if the universe were aligning to bring their fragmented family back together. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. That's more than I hoped for." "You're welcome, Mrs. Reynolds. A FEMA representative will contact you tomorrow with the address and move-in details." He paused. "And Mrs. Reynolds, I saw the news report about how your dog helped during the rescue efforts. That's quite an animal you have there." "Yes," Martha agreed, looking down at Max, who sat alert between her and Emma, as if understanding the importance of the call. "He's quite something." After hanging up, Martha shared the news with Emma and Frank. "We have housing, a 3-bedroom unit, accessible for people with disabilities." "That's wonderful news," Frank said, genuine relief in his voice. "Looks like things are starting to turn around." "The 3rd bedroom," Emma said thoughtfully. "Is that for Cousin Jimmy?" Martha hesitated, caught between not wanting to give Emma false hope and acknowledging the possibility that now seemed increasingly real. Maybe someday, if his doctors think he's ready. For now, it gives Max plenty of space. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. But later that evening, as they prepared for another night on their shelter cots, she returned to the subject. "Grandma," she said as Martha tucked the thin blanket around her shoulders, "I've been thinking about Cousin Jimmy." "What about him, sweetheart?" "He looks scary with his scars, but his eyes are kind." "Like Max's eyes." Emma glanced at the German shepherd who lay attentively beside her cot. "I think he's sad and lonely, like Max was at the shelter." Martha was continually amazed by her granddaughter's emotional intelligence. "I think you're right. He's been alone for a very long time. If he comes to live near us, can we visit him, even before he might live with us?" "Of course we can." "And will Max remember how to help him, like he helps me?" Martha stroked Emma's hair gently. "I think Max remembers everything important. That's why he recognized you as family from the beginning." Emma's eyes widened. "Is that why he picked me at the shelter? Because I smell like Mom, and Mom smelled like Jimmy?" "Partly, maybe. But I also think he recognized something special in you, something that had nothing to do with scent." Martha searched for words to explain the inexplicable bond between the child and the dog. "Sometimes souls just recognize each other." Emma considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Like puzzle pieces fitting together." "Exactly like that." As Emma drifted toward sleep, Martha found herself wondering about the puzzle pieces of their lives. Sarah, Jimmy, Emma, Max, herself, scattered by war and tragedy, now slowly finding their way back together in the most unexpected ways. The familiar weight of worry still pressed on her shoulders, the destroyed house, the uncertain future, the complications of caring for both a traumatized child and a disabled veteran. But for the first time in years, that weight was balanced by something equally powerful: hope. 1 year later, Martha sat in her rocking chair on the front porch of their new home, watching as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The modest ranch house wasn't grand. 3 bedrooms, an open floor plan with wider doorways to accommodate Jimmy's wheelchair on his bad days, and a fenced yard for Max. But it was theirs, free and clear. The insurance money from their flooded home had been enough for a down payment, and Jimmy's retroactive military benefits had covered the rest. After 5 years of being officially dead, his return to the living had brought a substantial lump sum that he had insisted on sharing with Martha and Emma. "Family takes care of family," he'd said in his slow, deliberate speech that had improved remarkably over the past year. The words had become something of a mantra for all of them. Martha smiled as she watched Emma and Max in the yard. At 9 years old, Emma had blossomed from the silent, withdrawn child of a year ago into a confident, talkative girl who had recently been elected class president. She was currently practicing for the upcoming school talent show, with Max as her assistant. "Stay, Max," Emma commanded, placing a treat on each of the German shepherd's paws. Max remained perfectly still, eyes fixed adoringly on Emma as she backed away. "Now, balance." On command, Max rose carefully to a sitting position while keeping his paws elevated, the treats balanced perfectly. Martha marveled at their teamwork, the perfect synchronization between child and dog that had only deepened with time. The side door opened and Jimmy maneuvered his wheelchair onto the porch. His movements were more fluid now after months of intensive physical therapy. The scarring on his face would always be there, but regular treatments had softened the worst of it. Most importantly, the vacant confusion that had clouded his eyes when they'd first reunited had been replaced by sharp intelligence and quiet humor. "She's going to win that talent show," Jimmy observed, watching Emma and Max. His speech was still slower than average, with occasional pauses as he searched for words, but the slurring had largely disappeared. "I think so too," Martha agreed. "Though I might be biased," Jimmy smiled, a real smile that transformed his scarred face. "Me too, but they're something special together." Martha couldn't argue with that. The bond between Emma and Max defied ordinary explanation. From that first moment at the shelter, through the flood and their subsequent rebuilding, the connection between them had only strengthened. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked softly, voicing a question she'd held back for months. "Sharing custody of Max, I mean. He was yours first." Jimmy shook his head without hesitation. "Never. He needs her as much as she needs him." He watched as Max completed a complex series of tricks, his amber eyes never leaving Emma's face. "Besides, he's still mine. Just ours now. Like everything else." Martha understood what he meant. Their household had developed its own rhythm over the past year, unusual perhaps, but perfectly suited to their needs. Jimmy had his own room but spent most days in the communal spaces, working remotely as a consultant for the military's K-9 training program. His experiences, both as a handler and as a wounded veteran, gave him unique insight that the program valued highly. Martha managed the household and volunteered at Emma's school. Her health stabilized with proper medication and reduced stress. And Emma thrived in the cocoon of love created by her unconventional family, her grandmother, her once-lost cousin, and the military dog who had saved them all in different ways. Max, for his part, seemed perfectly content with the arrangement. During the day, he stayed primarily with Emma, accompanying her to school as her registered therapy animal and participating in her after-school activities. Evenings found him often at Jimmy's side, particularly when the veteran's pain levels rose or when nightmares threatened. At night, Max made his rounds, checking first on Emma until she fell asleep, then settling in Jimmy's room where the two broken warriors found comfort in each other's presence. Occasionally, on stormy nights that triggered both their traumatic memories, Martha would find them all in the living room, Jimmy in his wheelchair, Emma on the couch, and Max standing guard over them both. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew Martha's attention. Frank Williams stepped out carrying a small cake box from the local bakery. "Right on time," Jimmy called. "Emma's about done with practice." Frank waved as he approached the porch, his visits now a regular part of their routine. After helping them navigate the complex bureaucracy of Jimmy's return from the dead, he had become something between a family friend and an honorary uncle. "How's our star performer?" he asked, setting the cake box on the small table between Martha and Jimmy. "See for yourself." Martha nodded toward the yard, where Emma was now having Max weave between her legs as she walked forward, a difficult trick they'd been perfecting for weeks. Frank whistled appreciatively. "That dog could still pass military certification with flying colors." "Probably," Jimmy agreed, pride evident in his voice. "But he's got more important work now." The more important work had become official 6 months ago, when Max had been certified as both a therapy dog for Emma and a service animal for Jimmy. The dual certification was unusual, but had been granted after extensive evaluation and a compelling letter from Dr. Chen, who continued to monitor both Emma's psychological progress and Jimmy's ongoing recovery. "Got something for you," Frank said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Official notification from the Department of Defense came to my office today." Jimmy accepted the envelope with a questioning look. Breaking the seal, he removed an official-looking document and read silently, his expression transforming from confusion to disbelief. "What is it?" Martha asked, concerned by his reaction. "The Congressional Medal of Honor," Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For Max." Frank nodded, smiling broadly. "Not the Medal of Honor itself, that's only for humans, but the K-9 Service Award with Distinction. It's the highest honor they can bestow on a military working dog." The ceremony is next month at Fort Belvoir. Martha leaned over to read the citation, her vision blurring with tears as she absorbed the words. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations, life-saving intervention during domestic disaster response, and exceptional service to wounded veterans and traumatized civilians. Does this mean Max is famous now? Emma had approached without them noticing, the German shepherd at her heels. Frank chuckled. I think Max has been famous since the flood, when all those news stations ran footage of him leading rescuers to stranded families. But this makes it official. Emma knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his neck. Did you hear that, Max? You're getting a medal for being a hero. Max responded by licking her cheek once, his tail wagging steadily. Will we all go to the ceremony? Emma asked, looking up at the adults with excitement. Of course, Jimmy said firmly. Family stays together for important moments. Martha felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest at those words. Family stays together. After all they had endured, war, death, mistaken identity, natural disaster, they had found their way back to each other. More than that, they had created something new from the broken pieces of their individual lives. A family bound not just by blood, but by choice, by shared trauma, and by love that transcended ordinary explanation. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed with Max performing his nightly ritual of staying until she fell asleep, Martha and Jimmy sat in the living room looking through old photographs. It had become something of a tradition for them, piecing together the fragments of their shared past, filling in gaps in Jimmy's memory, ensuring that Sarah's presence remained alive in their new family configuration. I found this one yesterday, Martha said, carefully extracting a faded Polaroid from an album. Sarah's 10th birthday. You were there. Jimmy accepted the photograph, studying it with the intense concentration he brought to memory exercises. The blue bicycle, he said after a moment. I helped Uncle Robert put it together. Martha nodded encouragingly. That's right. You stayed up half the night with him, trying to make sense of those assembly instructions. A shadow of grief passed over Jimmy's face. I wish I had been here when Sarah died, for the funeral. You were fighting your own battle, Martha reminded him gently. And in a way, you sent Max to us when we needed him most. Jimmy managed a small smile at that. Military working dogs. They know their mission, even when we don't. The sound of nails on hardwood announced Max's arrival. Having completed his duty with Emma, he came to check on Jimmy, pressing his head beneath the veteran's scarred hand in a gesture of comfort. Good boy, Jimmy murmured, scratching behind Max's ears. Good boy. Martha watched them together, the wounded warrior and the dog who had saved him, lost him, and found him again through an impossible chain of events. So many things had needed to align. Martha taking Emma to the shelter that day, Max recognizing Sarah's scent in her daughter, their paths crossing Frank's, the flood that had brought national attention to Max's heroism, Jimmy seeing that news report in his Baltimore hospital room. Coincidence, Martha had once believed. Now she wasn't so sure. Some bonds seemed destined to form, some souls meant to find each other across impossible divides. Penny for your thoughts, Jimmy said, noticing her pensive expression. Martha smiled, reaching out to stroke Max's head as the German shepherd settled between them. I was just thinking about how none of this should have been possible. You were declared dead. Max was scheduled for euthanasia. Emma had stopped speaking. Our house was underwater. By all logical measures, we shouldn't be sitting here now. Jimmy nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. But here we are. Here we are, Martha echoed softly. Not Exactly how any of us planned, Jimmy continued, gesturing to his missing leg, the scars visible on his arms. Not what we would have chosen, but still good, Martha finished for him when he trailed off, searching for words. Still worth it. Jimmy's eyes shone with emotion. Yes, still worth it. Max sighed contentedly between them, as if agreeing with their assessment. Outside, the evening had deepened into full darkness, but inside their imperfect, hard-won home, light and warmth prevailed. Martha thought of the long journey that had brought them here, not just the physical distance from shelter cots to their own home, but the emotional terrain they had traversed, from grief to hope, from loss to discovery, from isolation to family. The Medal of Honor ceremony would bring public recognition to what they already knew, that sometimes the greatest heroism lies not in grand gestures, but in the quiet persistence of love in the face of overwhelming odds, in Max's unfailing loyalty, in Emma's resilient heart, in Jimmy's determination to reclaim his life, in Martha's refusal to give up on any of them. Some wounds never fully heal. Martha knew this truth intimately. Jimmy would always bear his scars, both visible and hidden. Emma would always carry the absence of her mother. Max would always startle at certain sounds that triggered memories of combat. Martha herself would always feel the ache of those she had lost. But wounds could become bearable when shared among those who understood. Pain could transform into purpose. And family, whether born of blood or forged in adversity, could make even the deepest scars testament not just to what had been survived, but to what had been saved. As if reading her thoughts, Max lifted his head and looked between Martha and Jimmy, his intelligent eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. Then, with deliberate care, he rose and moved to the front door, standing alert. "What is it, boy?" Jimmy asked, instantly attentive to the dog's change in demeanor. A moment later, they heard Emma's voice from upstairs, small and frightened in the darkness. "Grandma? Jimmy?" Martha was already rising, her arthritic joints protesting, but her grandmother's instincts overriding the discomfort. "Nightmare," she said. Jimmy nodded in understanding. They were all too familiar with night terrors in this household. Max waited for them at the bottom of the stairs, patient but clearly concerned. Together, they made their way up to Emma's room, where they found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. "I dreamed about the flood," she whispered as Martha sat beside her, drawing her close. "The water was rising and I couldn't find you or Max or Jimmy." "But you did find us," Jimmy said, maneuvering his wheelchair closer to the bed. "Or rather, we found each other." "And we're not lost anymore," Martha added, smoothing Emma's hair back from her forehead. Max jumped onto the foot of the bed, a privilege normally not allowed but overlooked during moments of crisis, and settled his warm weight against Emma's legs. His presence, solid and unwavering, seemed to say what words could not. "I am here. We are safe. Together." Emma's breathing gradually steadied. The terror in her eyes receded, replaced by the security of being surrounded by her unusual but devoted family. "Can we all stay together tonight?" she asked, her voice small but no longer frightened. Martha exchanged glances with Jimmy, who nodded without hesitation. "Of course we can, sweetheart." Family stays together. As Emma drifted back to sleep, nestled between Martha's embrace and Max's protective presence, with Jimmy keeping watch from his wheelchair beside the bed, Martha thought again of the improbable journey that had brought them all to this moment. They had been strangers once, a lonely child, a damaged veteran, a grieving grandmother, a traumatized dog. 4 broken souls who had somehow found in each other exactly what was needed to become whole again. Not perfect, not unmarked by suffering, but whole in all the ways that mattered most. And in this quiet moment, with moonlight filtering through the curtains and the steady breathing of her family surrounding her, Martha found herself offering a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected miracles, and for the mysterious ways that love finds its path home, even through the darkest of nights. In our twilight years, we often wonder if our greatest chapters have already been written. Martha's story reminds us that family isn't always what we planned. Sometimes it's what finds us in our brokenness. Like Martha, many of us face losses that seem unbearable, homes threatened, health failing, loved ones gone too soon. Yet her journey with Emma, Jimmy, and Max shows that our capacity for love doesn't diminish with age, it deepens. The German shepherd who trembled in that shelter corner became the bridge that connected three wounded souls, proving that healing happens in the spaces between us when we dare to reach out. Martha couldn't save her husband from Vietnam's scars or prevent her daughter's tragic accident, but in choosing to open her heart again, despite every practical reason not to, she found purpose renewed. What unexpected blessings have entered your life when you thought your best days were behind you? Has a pet or person ever connected you to joy you thought was lost forever? Share your story of finding family in unexpected places. Remember, as Martha discovered at 68, our most meaningful chapters may still be waiting to be written if only we have the courage to turn the page.